Hey, you might be looking for an Acroyoga class. You've seen videos on Instagram and you're curious to try it out. And you're looking at all the different offerings here in New York City. And I want to talk a little bit about my teaching approach and my philosophy so that you can see if this is something that's like matching what you're looking for. I've gotten feedback that I should make things more fun and easy. To me, fun is when I do Acroyoga with a regular partner and we are calibrated on each other so that we kind of know what we want, what we need from each other, and you don't really have to talk much. So like communication and being clear in communication is really important in Acroyoga and in general. However, there's a point where you know each other enough that you can use shorthands and you understand each other enough so you know each other's intentions that you get more into like this flow space where with little nudges you can communicate very precisely what you're looking for, and then you're just like in this really beautiful flow space. And you might get to a point where like the sweat is just streaming down your body everywhere, and like you're working together on this one particular thing you want to nail, and like the wattage in your muscles is like turned up completely, and your mind is hyper-focused because you're like right at this edge of, like you're maybe missing like an inch, and then you can make the thing happen that you've been working on for so long, and your partner's right there with you, and they're like focused and they're contributing their best, and it feels really good. And then when you cross that final inch and you make the skill happen, there's this huge euphoria. Like, that is fun to me. Trying to kind of just make things fun and easy, I think it keeps you from having the real fun, and I'm looking for people to experience like this really awesome fun of, when you're really doing things. Let me back up a little bit. Some of my background plays into my teaching. I've had a lot of math, physics, and anatomy classes. To a big part, Acroyoga is kind of like a geometry, physics, anatomy problem. For example, if you look at my body, you can look at this bone as a line, you can look at this as a bone, you have an angle here. So based on that, you can do different force calculations. Probably here, just based on the leverage, I can have the least amount of holding power, but if I hold something here, I'm much stronger because it's closer to the fulcrum. So when you look at an acro pose or transition, and you kind of see all the lines and angles, momentums and force calculations, like you're sitting in a classroom and you do these calculations. It really illuminates to like what's going on and what, how the movement should be, how you have to move, so you don't have to develop force that's unrealistic. And on top of that, when you add anatomy, if you know what kind of bones you have, where the joints are, how the joints move, the muscles, right, like where the muscles are to do certain movements, the muscle size gives you an idea of how much strength it has. There's like a basic rule of thumb, right? Like the volume of my biceps is larger than my triceps, so my bicep is usually stronger. But then if you look at the volume of my leg has a lot more muscle, right? It's like this big compared to this, so my leg is a lot stronger. So you can do all of these rule of thumb calculations on angles, leverage, what your body can likely do. And that makes quite obvious what you have to do in Acroyoga. Like how to succeed at something, and it's simply like, if you move this length there, rotate here, you're gonna be within the limits of the force that the muscle should have. And I think because in class I spend a lot of time on these diagrams, it's really easy for me to see. and break down movements. However, and this is where I start a new section of this talk, you can't tell people what they obviously should do with their bodies. It seems very logical, right? As a teacher, teachers usually traditionally look at their student in dance, soccer, and they're like, well, you should kick with your foot, kick with your foot. And they kind of try to control them like puppets or robots and tell them what to move. However, if you understand how the brain works, it makes no sense at all. Your brain has different centers. For example, there's a motor cortex at the center. The motor cortex is really good with controlling complex and fine-tuned movements. You have the cerebellum at the back of your head. It's really good at proprioception. It's like where your body is, what's happening with the movement. You have your limbic part of your brain, which has your emotions, and then at the front you have the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is really good at like complex, analytical, intellectual problems. It's also the executive part of your mind. It's where your seat of consciousness is. So your executive mind, you can shift your focus to the very things your other brain centers do, like you can check in, how do you feel right now, right? And then you're basically switching your prefrontal cortex focus to your limbic brain, like, hey, how are you doing? Or you can, if you were trying to scratch your head with your hand, you can focus on, you know what your motor cortex is doing in order to do this movement. Or you can check in like to the sensory part, like how does the jeans feel on your skin? So your executive mind is a little bit like a boss. You can check in with all the different experts. You can kind of supervise and you can even like micromanage them. And this micromanaging is what is kind of causing the problem. I'll give you an example. If I tell you to scratch your head with your hand, probably your conscious mind focuses on your hand and on your head, and the scratching, you're like very focused and engaged in it. That's the prefrontal cortex kind of being involved in the movement. On the other hand, if I told you on a cue, you should get up off your chair as quickly as possible, you're probably focused on getting ready for the cue, and you don't really think about what your body does, right? But your body is you're likely gonna put your feet under your body so you can push yourself up. You might be like leaning a little bit forward, to get ready for the thrust. Your hands might be looking for like an armrest to push up. And basically your whole body's going through an adjustment, and your motor cortex is really good at these whole body movements. It creates motor plans, and these motor plans involve every part of your body. Because usually movements involve your entire body. Like I told you consciously, like a few things just to illustrate movements, like your hands getting ready, your feet going under, your chest leaning forward. But every other part of your body probably adjusted as well. Your neck probably cocked a little bit back. There was a spinal adjustment. And your motor cortex is really great at controlling all of these things. And what we did is, I focused you on something externally. So you weren't really thinking about a body part until I drew your attention to it. You're just thinking about, I want to get up, I want to focus on the cue, I want to sharpen my ears. And then your motor cortex took over. And that's how we best learn movement, if we let the motor cortex learn it. And we shift the control of the body from prefrontal cortex to motor cortex based on the cues we use. We had the example, like if I tell you to do a movement, like bend your elbow, you're very consciously going to bend your elbow. If I tell you outcome or goal, For example, in Acroyoga, it's like push your partner's shoulder up. You're not gonna really think about like how to use all of your muscles. You're just gonna focus on your partner's shoulder. So it's a body part, but it's not your own body part. And you're gonna do whatever you need to do to push it up. And another way of external focusing is using imagery. And there are various things of how we can get the conscious mind focused on other things than the body and let the motor cortex take over. And you might think I'm just giving you a bunch of blah blah and it's just, whatever you think and, doesn't really matter that much anyway. But there are actually over 200 scientific studies. And they're all pretty much concluding the same, and the effect is huge. For example, they took golf players. Group A, they told, focus on your arm as you swing. Group B, they said, focus on the club as you swing. They wanted to figure out what is the smallest possible change we can do to get a measurable effect. And you notice, like the swinging, you're swinging both times, right? If you focus here or here. But they found a huge difference. People were swinging like 50% better if they focused on the golf club. They took gymnasts. They asked them to jump and land. Gymnasts have to like land very precisely and not stumble. Group A, they told them like to focus, on whatever you need to jump, your muscles, like push off the ground with your leg muscles, and they were internally focused. The other group, they got a sticker on their chest, and they were told to focus on moving the sticker through the air. The people that focused on the sticker measurably jumped higher and landed more precisely. Like, think about this for a moment. These are the same people. They didn't receive a lot of training. As simple as putting a sticker on their chest and asking them to focus on it, they, within 30 seconds, increased their jumping power. Like, how much of a benefit is that? And I've tried out these techniques in my class. I've been teaching for a year now. Most of my students are novices, so I get to teach the same stuff over and over. In the beginning, I started by taking the best teaching approaches from the various teachers I had and combined them. And, I did things and then it seemed like things were going well compared to what I've seen. But I know like people tend to have certain problems as they get introduced to Acroyoga. And then I started applying these motor learning science ideas to it, and it took a little experiment, like how do you apply it. Some ideas seemed good on paper but didn't work out, and then randomly sometimes I just in the moment tried something and it worked really well. It was fascinating. By just making little changes earlier in class, suddenly students didn't have a problem anymore. That used to take them 5 minutes. It didn't even come up anymore. Or things that would take students 5 minutes to learn took suddenly only 1 minute. And like the main thrust is you don't really want to tell people too much what to do with their body parts, but you want to have them focused more on external focus and implicit learning, so that the motor cortex automatically kind of learns things. And the funny thing is, once people started learning faster and with this more effortless approach, they started telling me like, hey, learning Acroyoga is basically just like really intuitive, like it's really obvious. And they said it in a tone where it's like, why am I even taking a class? It's so easy. And it's like a funny thing of how sometimes when a teacher teaches poorly, students think they're learning something really hard. And if something is taught really well, students think it's an easy subject matter. But, hold on. Like, this is not where I think we're ready to teach people. I kind of started with like this math, physics, anatomy background to understand what the movement should be like. And the second step is understanding how the brain works in order to teach that movement to students so they can learn the best. The third step is there's a huge psychological component. And there's also significant research. There are things like a need-based teaching environment. There's a major psychology theory that about motivation, that we have three basic needs. It's for competence, belonging, and autonomy. And the students get these three things, it fixes a lot of other problems in psychology. and there are like pretty surprising studies, for example, on autonomy. It's like giving students choice. They wanted to test how small of a choice can make a measurable impact on learning. So they had study participants do something that they evaluated for performance. And the experiment group was interrupted and asked what picture to hang in the room. The picture has no connection to the tasks they were supposed to be graded on at all. It's just completely unrelated. But the students that were asked what picture they want on the wall performed significantly better. It's funny like how choice and having control is really important. I think a lot of times as teachers, we think we're supposed to give students the best way to do things. But it's really important for them to engage and make things their own. And it comes up in little things. I was in a ballet class, and you probably imagine that ballet is like very strict, like the movement you have to do has to be perfect. If you don't do it perfect, the teacher calls you out, and then in front of all the students, the teacher will tell you what you do wrong and what you should do right. And I noticed one student next to me, in the little reset between exercises, she would just do her own kind of little swings and things. And I noticed that's her autonomy outlet. And having just read about this in a psychology textbook, I realized it's really important for her to have the space to do a little bit of her own exploration. Like a teacher could go and be like, hey, you're not focused, like, stop doing that stuff. And this might have like a big psychological impact on the experience of that student. She might not say like, oh, I'm being so crimped, but like, just a little fun she got out of it, and like how her nervous system could integrate things, it meant a lot. So there's sometimes these little things that happen, and knowing what the psychological meaning and effect is can make a big difference. I want to talk specifically about confidence. Confidence in social media often is described as pretending to be something you're not, right? Fake it until you make it is pretend to be something you're not. However, in psychological terms, confidence has a lot of other things. It's, for example, daring to be in the front of class, so the teacher might give you feedback. Or it's trying a skill that you know you're likely going to fail and being okay with failing at it. It'll let you learn faster because you're not playing it super safe. Or it's if you make a mistake and fail, you don't completely emotionally crumble and think you're a terrible Acroyoga person, but to just kind of like be able to laugh it off. And confidence can be built in a lot of almost subtle things that people don't even notice. In a typical Acroyoga class, there's usually a teacher demo, and the teacher demonstrating things really well and pretty is like a big part of the teacher demonstrating the value, and students like looking up to it. And there's a place for inspiring people, and there's a place for seeing what a high level performance looks like. However, they did a scientific study where they had one group have a teacher demo and one group have a student demo. And then they evaluated the confidence level of the different people. And it turns out the teacher demo didn't raise the confidence level of students. Students kind of discounted, they're like, oh, of course they're teachers, I've been doing this for years. It doesn't mean I can do it. But when there was a student demo, students looked at it and were like, hey, if Susie or Joe can do it, I can do it. And this kind of like, if they can do it, I can do it, it brought up their confidence. And then afterwards, students were more likely to try the exercise, they're more likely to commit to like giving it a serious try. It really helped their learning. And so in my learning labs, I also like to do student demos. And an added bonus that I discovered is student demos often run into some kind of problem. And then that's a great teaching moment where I can actually show how to resolve a problem. And the students can observe like how to get past a particular problem that's very relevant to them because some of them will run into it. And I think sometimes students look at the student demos and think they're less good because they're less high level. But it actually seems to give them a lot more confidence and help them to see more like what they have to do, like what problems they run into. And yeah, so there are really interesting ways how you can impact the psychological context of learning. To kind of sum it all up, I gave you like a really, high-flying, ambitious idea of how amazing I am. In practice, most of my teaching is just to tell people, straighten your elbows, straighten your knees. It's, I know, every time novices come, like some of the biggest problems are just, I don't know, I'm trying to make a little of a light ending. I teach usually Saturdays from 3 to 6 p.m. It's a 3-hour class. If you're in good shape, I've had people come for the first acro class for 3 hours. It's pretty well. If you're not in such great shape, a 3-hour workout class might not be for you. If you're more advanced, a 3-hour class is awesome because it really lets us get into more depth. And on Sundays, I teach from 5 to 6 p.m. It's a 1-hour class. It's great to get like a little taste of Acroyoga, or if you're more experienced, maybe you just need a little quick fix in your day. I teach a triple career in Midtown New York City.